most people drop off when they get the negative feeling of failure because of the relationship internally that they have with the word. Oh, this didn't work right away and people are looking at me and they're probably judging me and I have failed. But if you can firstly get sort of more calloused to that, then you start to really like the pain because you know where that pain is, there's growth on the other side, and that growth is going to increase the likelihood of success over time. And you get into just sort of a much different mentality.
So this week's episode, I speak to Henry Mitchell. Henry's based in LA and is a really interesting guy because he comes from a background of studying medicine and is very intellectual in that way. And he talks about his evolution from being really driven to become a doctor and his experience then after being exposed to the medical system and his thoughts on the system and his slow evolution away from that to now being an entrepreneur and co-founder of Still Life, which is an online app and a live venue in LA where they host breathwork, ice bars and things like that. It's a really, really great chat around all things entrepreneurship, values, and what it means to be still and the power of stillness. So hope you enjoy.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Momentum Lifestyle Podcast by myself, Blake Worrell-Thompson.
And me, Janoah Van Keekum. Momentum is a men's wellbeing and performance community dedicated to helping men be better.
Each week, we deep dive with your favorite thought leaders and experts from around the world to get their insights to help you be better. Enjoy the episode. Now, guys, before we get started on this week's podcast, I want to talk to you about our Momentum Mastermind. The Mastermind is our 12-month program for men who want to surround themselves with other committed men, all with similar interests, values, and goals. Whether you're looking to build or grow a profitable lifestyle business, develop financial freedom, get in the best shape of your life, or create an intimate and epic relationship, the Mastermind is perfect for those who are looking to have it all. We know that to create these results and this kind of lifestyle on your own can be super challenging. So join now for your free 30-day trial. Simply visit our website, www.themomentumlifestyle.com.au. Up the top, you'll see a section for programs. Click on the programs, you'll see our Mastermind, and you can sign up there now for your free 30-day trial valued at $1,000. We look forward to seeing you part of the Mastermind.
Henry Mitchell, it was really good to meet you. So firstly, we came across each other via chance of me stumbling across Still Life here, via being introduced to a friend, and then me loving the concept of Still Life and asking Emily, the girl that I met, and I'm like, I want to chat to one of the guys. Like, who can I speak to? And she's like, Henry's your man. And then once we caught up, had a coffee, and what I loved about when we first had a conversation, I could see that the main thing you were interested in is like, you were taking notes and giving me advice, and it was almost like an interview at first. I was like, whoa, hang on a second. And you were just so genuinely interested in like, how can I help this guy? What can I take from what he's, they obviously we're having a conversation about me interviewing you, but that wasn't even on your radar, which I love the way you sort of approached that conversation with curiosity and how can I add value and how can I use what I know to help this guy. So it was a really different approach to having a catch up with someone, which I absolutely loved. So, firstly, a little bit of a kudos to you for the way you carry yourself. I love it. And so after the conversation, I was like, we're definitely having a conversation. So thanks for jumping on board, mate.
Well, thank you. And just to make something very clear, it's a very selfish activity, in my opinion, to do that. And that's just because over time, after testing sort of different strategies of the best way to sort of present yourself and be with people, the one that's become abundantly clear to yield the best results is give as much as possible whenever you can, wherever you can, whatever that might be. And so it's one of these things where that's sort of the agreement, the philosophy going into a lot of this stuff. And it's not necessarily like I have anything, hopefully there's some value to give, but it's really how much of my attention can I give you at any time and then pick up on any way that there's cross connectivity. And you will never see the immediate benefits of that because it's a long-term game. And it's one that averages out over time to, in my opinion at least, yield the most net good, both externally coming in and internally coming out. So again, I just want to make sure that everyone knows it's really selfish.
Well, I mean, in the end, there's always intention behind what we do, which can lead to some kind of self-interest. But I loved it. And there's something powerful in that presence, right? And we even had a conversation about that later on, how it's something that I've learned around like giving value and a shift is around not going into conversations or scenarios or many people like, okay, what can I get from this person? Because particularly when you're networking, Like LA is like a networking center, right? And everyone's like, let's connect, let's do this, rah, rah. Which is cool. Like, I love it. Like, but also there can be a feel from people. It's like, okay, who does this person know? What can I get from him? And it's extremely refreshing. And it's also very magnetic, right? Energy to have someone who's like, they're here. And you can tell they're not worried about, trying to, ask their own question next, or they've got some other ulterior motive or theme they want to talk about. They're like, literally like, they've heard what you've said and they're now thinking about it and going, oh, I haven't thought about this. It's a very, very powerful way to communicate and interact with people. So I think it's something that I've noticed that I want to really shift to and embody a lot more in how I interact with people. And so one thing we mentioned sort of briefly, and I spoke about it a bit and you sort of probed me on it, was the concept of values. I work with values. You obviously work with values. I heard Jim speak about values. I think it's a word thrown around a lot, but prior to me doing any work around values, I didn't really get it. So I'd love you to speak to, like, do you think values are important? And how do you what's your model of using values in your life?
Brilliant question. So this is really rooted in a lot of work that I've done with Jim on values itself, where there is a subconscious hierarchy of values that are driving your behavior, right? And I say that they're largely subconscious because it's much more appetizing for our internal narrative not to really know what these are, right? And I'll pad this out a little bit more. So if you look at all of your behavior and each juncture and just sort of forensically go back, you can trace this back to a hierarchy. You can basically say, okay, if I think I'm writing on paper and I think that my values are to generosity, kindness, all of these things, all of these sort of very glorified sort of pro-social things to put on a piece of paper, audit all of your behavior throughout the day and see if those match up, right? Because often or not, that's not really the case. That's just a very appetizing thing to say. Personally, I have a deep relationship to this because at one point in my life, I wanted to be a doctor. And I thought that I wanted to be a doctor because I really wanted to thank my gifts and help society and heal all of these things. And then when I audited my behavior, I realized that I'm not actually being generous throughout the day. I'm not actually trying to really care and help people all of the time. What I'm really doing, peacocking at parties, right? I'm going around and telling people, oh, yeah, I'm going to be a doctor.
So you found yourself doing that a bit. Yeah.
All the time. When I'm looking at my behavior and I'm like, maybe it's not actually the values that I think that are actually driving this. Maybe it's because society glorifies these professions so highly that I gain immediate status by telling people that this is it. And that just goes down to, oh, I'm telling people that this is what I'm doing. And then I get the, oh, aren't you amazing? Yeah. And it's like, oh my God, my value here isn't necessarily to generosity. My value here is to social status. And as a tribal species, absolutely, of course, that seems to make a lot of sense. But also, you can see how there is so much usefulness in having that lie underneath conscious awareness, because anybody that's aware that social status is driving their behavior then runs the risk of talking about that publicly. And it's a very taboo topic. If you bring up how social status is sort of driving hierarchy in our society, people get they get their feathers ruffled. It doesn't feel very comfortable. So everybody likes to just kind of ignore it, right? Anyway, so that framework is best observed when your mind is quiet. Because if your mind is noisy, if you have a lot of chatter, there's a lot of self-serving narrative that will tell you all of these things like your values are to generosity, la-di-da-di-da. You have to get quiet enough to actually see the truth. And then at that point is, I have a very clear idea now from really tracing my behavior. And we were talking about this too. Peter Drucker has a great quotation where he says, don't tell me your values, show me your bank statement and your calendar, and I'll show you your values, right? And so if you do this very sort of dispassionate, clean audit, you can understand, okay, I have a hierarchy that's driving my behavior. These are the values that are actually shown on paper. And then comes the really interesting part. Are these the values that I want to be driving my behavior or not? And that takes a lot of hard conscious work to change. If you do, then you can start to align your trajectory in a different way. And there's so many other usefulness. Well, there's so much further usefulness to this tool, because if I understand my own values dispassionately, I can start to map that onto other people's. And if I can understand other people's values that are driving their behavior, knowing that these values there's a long delay and a lot of work that needs to be done in order to shift them. It's like, I know that those values are going to be pretty similar over time. I can predict their future behavior in different settings. Extraordinarily useful when determining relationships. Anyway, I've gone on a nice long tangent, so I'll take a pause and a breath for a second there.
No, I love where you've gone with that. And so I also look at, and just to touch on what you said also, if you realize that a value of yours, like remember I said one of mine is significance. Like, and in the past, I would have actually felt really awkward and embarrassed about saying, I've realized like I would love to be known for what I do. We talked about impact, right? And you're like, yeah, but I'm like, yeah, significance also. Like, okay, there you are. And it's okay, like, to have a value that it's like, I want to have an impact, but also want to be known for doing that. That is totally fine. Another question to that is, and I have my own answer to this, and I do tend to separate values for different areas sometimes. Do you also do that in terms of, do you feel there are different values driving like an intimate relationship versus career? And understanding, like, what I mean by that is that in a relationship, like passion might be something, a driver, but then in a career, it might be more around significance, for example. Do you tend to separate them, or do you believe and feel that there's just an underlying core regardless that'll filter out into every area of your life?
Firstly, brilliant question. I want to just highlight a chunk because you mentioned something that's really important. One of my top values is the significance, right? And at first that might not be so like appetizing because it's like, well, I want to be known. Well, no. Let's use the tribal instincts that we're hardwired with. That really, what that's saying is, I want to be recognized. I want the tribe to appreciate this. Okay, great. So significance is driving my behavior. It's the vehicle, right? If you put that to a good cause, what you're doing, you're helping people to understand themselves and to basically use frameworks to better their lives. What you're doing is you're assembling values as a vehicle for good. You know, it's using that tribal recognition. It's using that sort of third-party perspective to really slingshot yourself into a very good direction, instead of, which would be a fool's errand, saying, I don't want significance to be a value of mine whatsoever, going against nature and resisting, which will only push this pendulum in other ways, and your subconscious behavior will lash out and get into all sorts of twists and turns because it's not being fed, because a true intrinsic value of yours isn't being fed. So that alignment is really key. If you know that, say, for example, a high value is to wealth, it's like, okay, that's not a bad thing. That isn't. What do you want to use that for? And then do the audit where it's like, okay, if this is my value and I'm using it for, you know, I really highly value wealth and I'm getting all of this wealth for myself. Do you have the ability to divorce that from money? And if you're just spending it on like every supercar that you can find, is that fulfilling you? Right? Those are the questions that you need to really appropriate, because at the end of the day, what you're trying to get to is a feeling of contentment with everyday life, a feeling of enoughness within yourself and with everything that you have. And I'll speak for myself. That's what I'm looking for, is enoughness, satisfaction, a deep resting just peace with what is. And so if that is actually disturbing that, then that comes to the point where it's like, okay, let's evaluate how I'm expressing these values and really see what they are, and then make sure that everything that I'm doing in terms of my actions, in terms of my significant steps, instead of, you've got the strategy, the values up here, pull it down to the more tactics. Okay, are the tactics are they fulfilling the right strategy? Is that vehicle all working well? This is like values 5.0, so apologies if this is getting really
I'm pushing and probing. And also just to touch on that, I would argue that money or wealth would be an extrinsic value that will help you achieve something intrinsic, the way I look at that, right? Just for people to understand, like, and it's fine to have wealth as a value, as your point. It's like, but what is that going to provide for you, right? That's for people to sort of really think about who haven't really looked at values before. Now, I want to sort of shift to the evolution of Mitchell, and obviously you mentioned you started studying medicine, right? You said you're studying probability, and obviously with that as an intention, what was it that actually shifted the trajectory of, you know, your path? So being driven into medicine and what you thought maybe were your values, what you wanted to achieve through medicine. What shifted? What was it that changed for you?
So there was a moment that I had where it was, studying probability at the time. When you study probability and you take a step back, it's really a whole field of knowledge based around the fact that the human mind does not intuitively understand large numbers. And this has been capitalized enormously in places like Las Vegas, Nevada, right? Where we don't really comprehend base rates very well. And we have a lot of sort of heuristical, what I mean by that is just shortcuts in the mind that get us to making silly bets all of the time and not really understanding a lot of the frameworks that lead to them, because we never really evolved to really need to understand numbers over 120, which is the average tribe size. 7 individual units, you can't really visualize that in your head after about 7. We never needed to create this. Any of our ancestors didn't really have a selection pressure to be able to do this, right?
Right, so heuristics is like, instead of saying it's 8,000 X amount of meters, it's like it's 2 football fields.
Yes.
Right? So the way we sort of, because we can't actually, we struggle with those big numbers.
Absolutely. Yep. So when studying probability and understanding my inability to really get really anything above, sort of the number 100, Daniel Kahneman and Amos Tversky did a lot of this with Thinking Fast and Slow in terms of experimenting. And people aren't more inclined to give to charity that saves 20,000 children versus 200,000 children. And that's a order of magnitude larger, right? It's a huge amount more. And our minds just go, oh, okay, whatever. Anyway, so when studying probability and trying to superimpose the existence and the circumstances of my life into large numbers, I realized that I had won the equivalent of at least 40 lotteries before I was even born, right? And at that point, you have this information and you can either look at it and act upon it, or just look the other way and do whatever you want to do.
Could you speak to the lotteries for a moment? Explain what you mean by that.
Yeah. White heterosexual male. Those were 3 things that I didn't pick, yet my simulation, boom, went right into that. And it's like, wow, that is a huge advantage in this day and age. How about the geography, right? Having been born in America and then raised in England, incredible fortune that I didn't pick as well, right? History. Right? The point of time, if we were to evaluate all of the humans born in time and extend this into the future to a silly thoughts experiment, but just this window of time that we're born into, again, extraordinarily lucky. When was the last time you walked outside and had any fear of being eaten by another animal? Has anybody really worried about needing where the next hot meal is coming from? Right? Again, that's just sheer luck. And it gets to the point where family that love and accept me, that was something that was, when looking at it, unbelievably fortunate, because I look around and it's deft in our society. And so when looking at all of these things and being like, okay, if we assign a probability to all of these different pieces, all of them, I had won these lotteries before I was even born, right? And so with all of that being said, and it's like, there's another 18,000 that I'm not listing, right? With all of that being said, I look at this and I have this inability to really understand it. And it was like, okay, I need to say thank you to this. To whom much is given, much is required. I need to do something here so that I don't squander this, because people would kill to be in my shoes. And I need to give back in whatever way I can. And the most convenient way for my mind to come to an answer was through medicine. Use this and really help to heal and give out. That's really the societal narrative that has floated to the top of mind quickly enough. And so I committed to pursuing a career in medicine at the undergraduate stage. And through that, just the sheer amount of information and really incredible fields of study gave a lot of insight. And then it came to a different point where, through the work with values, realized that firstly, like, I want to be a doctor. It was actually more towards the glorification than it was helping. And then I really looked at, okay, what has helped me? What has been helpful for me at this stage? And just looking at very dispassionately at the industry of medicine in the Western world, and understanding that when you put medicine on a capitalist and consumerist sort of society, it adopts those values. And you can just look at that and say, okay, it's done very well for curative medicine, because that fits very well on a sort of, it's much more profitable, right? It's much more profitable to sell Xanax than it is meditation because it's a quick fix and it's a cure, right? It's a curative mechanism for something that's within you. However, when looking at more preventative exercises like exercise, nutrition, meditation, anything introspective, all of these things, it's like, these are the things that have actually, when I've created habits around them over time, have really helped me internally to feel more easeful with my world, right?
Yep.
And that's when I looked at all of this and said, okay, cool. If I'm trying to get into medicine because I'm really flattering the value of status and I don't want that to be truly driving my behavior, what is there that is really actually helping people? Well, is helping myself, and that I think there could be a potential opportunity to really divert all of this attention of, thanking whatever it is that has sort of created my circumstance. Boom. Okay, this has been what's helping me, which is stillness of mind. This is what's helped me from a meta perspective. That's what I really want to put my energy into, because I think with doing that and supporting the people that are sort of hosting in our space and sort of describing the different modalities to stillness and sharing those tools, that seems to be a lot more healing for the people around me. And it's far more scalable than anything I could do with my own hands. And I can let go of the reins of recognition a little bit and actually serve something that feels much greater than myself.
So just to really touch in on, I'm not discrediting medicine and science because it's done amazing things and saved so many fucking lives. But there is a part of that world and the pharmaceutical world and the world of medicine where I feel, you did touch on this, that what is prescribed is a great symptom number, but is designed to not like cure at a root level. A lot of these things. And so, if you had a year that you've earned X amount of money and you suddenly cure these people and they don't need your product anymore next year, you got to keep the shareholders happy and all the rest. So in just business, you've got to look at that, right? And was that a big part of also what was the push away from you? It's like, cool, while there's one piece of it that has huge value to society and has saved and made better so many lives, there's also a big chunk of it there which doesn't align with what you feel is actually right.
Absolutely. And it's quite funny, you look at the Hippocratic Oath, do no harm. And to touch on the point that you were just making, there's a lot of the time it's, if I create a system which subtly harms you over time and then sell you a cure for that, it's again, very profitable.
Right.
And I'm by no means putting a big overarching blanket on Western medicine and pushing all of that away. I have a deep respect for especially the people that sacrifice and the sheer height of the hurdles that need to be jumped in order to get into the position to be able to perform surgery or to diagnose all of these things. It's utterly incredible and awe-inspiring. And I know that because I've seen the system to get there. It's incredible, right? But just to touch on the point as well, it's not always, there are hidden incentives. And again, this goes right back to values, individual values. In a capitalist consumerist society, especially, let's just zoom in on the States, right? The value towards wealth is, well, it's really a value towards respect. And that value is accumulated by wealth, right? We look at people like Elon Musk and Bill Gates and they're the richest guys in the world, right? And that's who we lionize. However, you go to a place like Italy, and in Italy, they'll lionize people that have a very refined palate, when it comes to food or music or stuff like that. That's where the respect and the tribal sort of admiration comes from. And so you just look at the culture at that point and you can see that the values are driving behavior in different ways. We take this back to medicine and you have a lot of people that are like, I want to get a new car, because that's going to make me, sexier, and that's going to make me more enviable to my neighbor. And these are a lot of the things that are motivating the people. And it's like, okay, well, if I'm going to do that, then there's a really quick way to do that. And maybe we just start selling opiates to fix some of these problems, and you see where the warping of incentives can then sort of craft shady narratives. And a lot of this, the big piece to this, so much of this is subconscious. So much of this is under the surface. People are just behaving without even realizing it in this way and what they're trying to satisfy. And so with all that being said, I realized how much work has been done in the curative area of Western medicine but how much has sort of not been done in the preventative place. And that provides opportunity. That provides a lot to learn. And that is a really fun pursuit to sort of walk into the unknown in this direction instead. And sometimes it's lonely, and sometimes you have to swim against the stream. But if the stream's kind of going off of a cliff, maybe that's the right thing to do. Maybe. But again, this all comes down to constantly auditing the surrounding culture, the extrinsic values, intrinsic values, and matching them. It's a dance, it's not like one and done, I've got the answer and this is it for the rest of my life.
Yep.
Anyway, again, went on like 12 different tangents, so I apologize for that.
It's good. You get excited. I love it. I'm just probing here. So yeah, I mean, it's pretty clear on there's a sort of a split between medicine and the health/sick care system and how that works. But obviously that being a big catalyst for you, then we'll move towards Still. So I love the story. You and Spencer, you were college buddies. Is that right? It's almost like you make an American movie out of it. And so from a business entrepreneurial point of view, I'd love to understand the process from like inception to what was in between. What was your process from like, hey, having a conversation over a beer to now having Still Life and an app and, having 30, 40 people come to an event on a weeknight, like regularly. So I'd love to understand that process.
Yeah.
It's a big one, I don't know, but...
No, it is. And I think I want to preface something very clearly, right? Again, let's go back to the mind of just Homo sapiens. The way that we make sense of a chaotic world is to use language and words to label concepts and then create stories. So what I'm about to recount to you is a story. Now, part of it, this goes back to heuristics. Part of the narrative fallacy is that I will create a story that is far more self-serving, embellishing, and will overlook luck, circumstance, all of these things that we had actually just been talking about. And crafting a story, for example, I could say, we sat down and over that beer, we mapped out everything for the next 5 years.
On a napkin.
Yeah, that's it. And it all happened that way, and it was just magic. And that would absolutely do zero justice to the amount of confusion, hard conversations, ambiguity with what to do.
This is the stuff I want to get to, because this is like the romantic idea of being an entrepreneur and starting a business is the first story. But the reality of it is, the napkin story and it all played out. This is the real story. This is what I want to get to. This is great.
Good. Yes. And there's so much not knowing, doing the wrong thing. Like, for example, I read some of these like entrepreneurial books now, like Disciplined Entrepreneurship. Great book. And I'm like, holy shit, I wish I had read this 4 years ago because we did everything wrong around this, Could have saved us a lot of time. And a lot of these things, you have to learn the hard way. You have to embody the knowledge before it really becomes real. Let me give you a good example of that. Crossing the Chasm is an incredible book, Jeffrey Moore, and basically talks about the sort of bell curve that happens with the adoption of new technology in the world, right? I read that book for the first time and threw it aside, and then 2 years later had an advisor say, no, go in and read this book, and then start to actually implement the practices and embody the knowledge. And after embodying the knowledge, it became clear what they were talking about. I got it in a much deeper degree, and it has significantly helped our business to become far more receptive to feedback rather than thinking that we could figure it out before anything. It's sort of a very masculine approach where it's like, here's the plan and it's not going to change. The ability to then Crossing the Chasm was really talking about, okay, how do we get into our customers' minds, understand how a word of mouth engine starts to work, and then really ask the questions from them and being way more sort of feminine to a degree and really receptive and embodying all of that and then implementing it. So I mention this because there's this difference between reading it. There's a difference between sort of knowing the path and walking the path. The walking piece, sometimes you have to learn these lessons the hard way. Sometimes you have to make the mistakes and to really realize them instead of just hearing a slogan that some incredible business person just throws out there. It's like, okay, I've heard that before, but I need to actually screw that up first to realize the value in those words. And so I say all of this because to answer the initial question, with Spencer, with Jim, with myself, when discussing all of these things, it was very much okay, here's a plan we basically just want to share this idea that your mind can get into a state of awareness, a very quiet state of awareness that we have put a label on and called stillness, right? Your mind can become still. And we're just going to try and share this idea, or ironically, lack of ideas, because when it's very quiet, there's not much narrative. There are no stories, there are no fantasies. You are just right here, right now, right? So it's okay, we want to share this. Having that be the sort of pure intention, very, very key. Because in a chaotic world with all of this stuff that comes up, you ask me in March of 2020, what do I think my 5-year business plan is? And I would have given you a completely fictitious nonsense answer that has nothing to do with anything that has happened over the past 3 years, right? Because nobody could have predicted COVID occurring. So,
well,
yep.
Anyway.
But having the intent of, okay, this is what we want to do, and then creating these plans, screwing up, getting feedback left and right, and really the underlying piece is persistence.
Yep.
If you stick with it long enough, good things will come. Most people drop off when they get the negative feeling of failure because of the relationship internally that they have with the word. Oh, this didn't work right away, and people are looking at me and they're probably judging me, and I have failed. Mm-hmm. But if you can firstly get sort of more calloused to that, then you start to really like the pain, because you know where that pain is, there's growth on the other side, and that growth is going to increase the likelihood of success over time. And you get into just sort of a much different mentality, which then fuels the persistence. Like, I'm going to stick with this. And if you stick with it long enough, and it's always going to be longer than you want, because going back to heuristics and mapping into the future, our mind's not very good at it. It's always going to take longer than you want. But if you persist, things will happen for the good, right? Especially if you have a very clear idea of what it is that you want to do in the first place. Then it's just a constant dance. It's a balancing act with anything that this world has to throw you.
So obviously you would have learned a lot about characteristics within yourself that have been not so helpful, and some that have been extremely helpful. And to that point around persistence, I want to really reinforce that, having also gone through similar experience of like growing businesses. It's one of my characteristics to be impatient and then get distracted. And so I actually consciously considered myself as someone pretty driven and consistent, but my idea of consistency was a lot shorter than what it needed to be, right? So we're talking trying something for 6 months, maybe even a year, and it not quite working, and then kind of just letting that go and diverting over here somewhere, when really that's needed some tweaks and some shifts. And so I've learned a characteristic of mine that has been to my detriment and to the detriment of the business has been impatience, and really extending, like, patience isn't 6 months or a year in this game. It's years. And also distraction was it, like, I'd get bored and be like, oh, this isn't quite working. Oh, fuck. All right. Well, I'm going to go this. This guy's an expert over here. I'm going to go over here and this thing's gone. What have you noticed as some of the key traits, habits, behaviors that have held you back? And then a couple maybe that you're like, these ones have really been benefits that I've had to grow and strengthen.
Brilliant question. So let's take this back to significance, where everything has ascendant and descendant qualities. Impatience with action makes it so that you do more and you work. Impatience with results makes it so that you go back to action. So it depends on the context. If you have impatience with action, then you will continually be motivated to work and to craft value. And then if you shift it into a different context while waiting for results, then that's where the impatience has a descendant quality to it. So understanding the context to work the muscle is really important. And to answer your question, it's understanding where to put the qualities in. It's really, finding the right buckets for the right qualities at that time, right? Because I have a really similar sort of mentality when it comes to impatience with just wanting to get things done, right? And just plowing through stuff. And it's such a common fault of, you've really nailed this right here, because we can take this to a more sort of engineering and physical background, where if you think about something as a system, there could be a very long feedback delay that you are actually interrupting because you're being too impatient. For example, let's just use a very simple example. If you have a very long pipe that's leading to your shower and your shower's too hot and you're like, oh, it's really hot. And then you yank it down to cold and you're like, oh, it's still really hot. And then there's a long delay and then it gets really, really bloody cold. You know, if there's that,
been there.
Yeah, if there's that huge delay between it and then you're like, oh, fuck it, I don't even need to shower. And then you get out, you know, if there's that really long delay, you don't put it into the middle and wait. And then it's like, oh, actually, this is really pleasant, right? So there's something there where it's like, if you have the integrity of intent, where if we take this back to, yes, we know that the shaping of stillness is really what we want to be able to share with the world. Okay, we know where our intent is, and we're really happy with the package that we have with what we know right now, and let it sit instead of trying to, you know, rechange the wrapping paper too quickly.
Yeah.
Because we've done this as a business multiple times, where, especially with external circumstances, we opened up this studio March of 2020 as an in-person space to find stillness. Great, had 3 events, and then it turns out, you know, clustering people together in a confined environment that has poor ventilation probably isn't all that good for the next 2 years, right? So that sort of inspired a shift into technology. We had to shift our messaging. We had to shift the way that people see Still Life as a brand, right? And so then it's like, okay, we've launched this app. And then it's, okay, now we know what we can do in terms of we have this arm of technology and COVID's sort of more in the rear view mirror and we can start hosting events. Now we need to wrap this other arm back in. And there was so much experimentation with changing the messaging. And again, did we let it sit for too short of a period of time? Who knows? Did we do it too quick? All of this. And it's really understanding. It's firstly very hard to read the label when you're sat inside the jar, right? And so it's really difficult to understand how people are viewing the company and the changes. And then if you don't sit with it long enough, you don't know if that really sinks in and percolates through and has an ability to ignite that word of mouth engine within a community. And it's like, oh, okay, well, it's obviously not working. Let's be really quick and iterate and go in a different direction. And then all of a sudden it's like, now we're setting out a whole different set of information to a community of people that are looking at this and are getting confused.
Yes.
And so at that point, I know I've gone on, again, a couple of sort of tangents here, but the single most important thing that you can do when starting a business is building trust. Yes. Trust with your customer. It's the difference between Apple and Facebook right now, right? Trust will imply longevity. And the reason that trust is so important and it's so difficult to see when you are in a business is, imagine if you have a gumball machine and you have all of these gumballs, and each gumball is a data point that you know about your business. And say you have 999 blue gumballs and 1 red gumball. And that's all the information that you know about your business. And it's like, okay, say you're a shoe company and it's like, all of my shoes are really cool and this is our messaging, etc., etc. Well, your customers are only going to get 2 or 3 data points. They're only going to get 2 or 3 gumballs, and then they're going to stretch. Basically, they're going to stretch their own narrative based on a very few amount of data points. So if they get that red gumball and 2 blue ones, it's like there's inconsistency here. These 2 gumballs say that these are a really cool shoe company, and this one over here says that they sell clogs. I don't know. Then all of a sudden, that inconsistency erodes trust. And it's very difficult to do because when you look at your big ball of gumballs, you're like, obviously they're all blue except for that one. You know, there's 999 here that are all the same color apart from this one. Your customer has 2 blue and 1 red and is like, actually, no. You know, that small sample size really distorts the way that they view you. And so, again, the difference with all of these delays is that if you continually move so quickly and you think you're the same because you have all of this information of you and your business and how much time but you're not taking into account that someone looking at you has very few pieces of data, and that their data might be inconsistent with the way that you've been changing so quickly and rapidly prior to, then they don't really have that trust. They don't really have that connection, that relationship. And they say stuff like, I don't really know what they do, or yes, I kind of think that they do this, but they might not. And they kind of do this and they might not. That is a problem that, again, we've got the scars to prove it. It's like we've confused people multiple times with, yes, we're an app, but now we're opening our space up again. And now we're fusing the space in the app. And everyone's like, too much.
Yes.
Too much, right? And so to really loop this all back and to summarize, I think that something here that is very key is being intentional, working your ass off, being impatient to craft something around that intention, and then sitting back and realizing that the delays are going to be longer than you want, but letting it sit because that will build trust. And if it's all integral to the prior intention, the right people who you are targeting will talk about this behind your back. That's word of mouth referencing. And that is the single most important thing that you can have as a business, because they're doing your marketing for you, right? People will talk about you behind the back, and that will then increase your network effect. So again, all great in theory, much more difficult in practice. Some of these things, even though it might sound really concise, you might have to learn yourself.
Yeah. No, it's that. Actually, I was speaking to someone else the other day about business coach, my actual business coach, about the concept of, particularly when, and we'll talk a bit more on Still in a second, when you have a business that does a range of things. I actually was speaking to some past clients and potential new clients. I remember asking, like, what actually turns you off working with a person or a business? They're like, them telling me they can do everything, right? And I was like, like, you're saying they can do this, the next minute they're over here, and it's like inconsistency. 1 minute they're expert at wealth, the next minute they're expert at relationships, that kind of stuff. And I was like, I noticed in myself that I had started off with, I was the meditation expert. And then it evolved into things around like confidence and purpose and creating lifestyle business. And then I was work with women over here, then men over here. And I actually noticed I've confused the hell out of everyone, because I've moved into here. And in terms of, yes, you may have all these other skills, but in terms of messaging, consistency and clarity are of utmost importance. And people will come to you when they're just really, it's just funny how this landed. Like they'll come to you when they are clear and trust what you do on something pretty clear and specific. The other things they can play out in the back end. And so it's a really good point that you made, and actually really highlighted the same point that my coach made on this, which is like, this is how you build trust with people. And so in terms of still life and the actual concept and practice, so it's everyone I speak to is like, yeah, I can't clear my mind. And, the idea of being still is often quite uncomfortable for a lot of people. So what's the process for helping people get beyond that to be able to access the place of still? And then part two, how does this actually impact performance, right? So and I know I initially thought this with like, I don't want to become this like airy-fairy, still meditation guy who's lost his edge. And then I started doing the work and I was like, oh no, I've just got more energy to focus on the things that are important to me. So I'd love you to speak to that. So the process of like being still, and then how does that actually impact you at work or, at the gym?
Yes, both great questions. Firstly, let's break the words down to a pure definition so that we can make sure that we're communicating, we're completely on the same page. When I say stillness, that is a label, it's a word for a concept. That concept is a state of awareness. That state of awareness is one where there is no perception of past. There's no perception of future. Your awareness is right here, right now, right? Observing the present moment, the only thing that's actually real. For example, I can't do this in the past, and I can't do this in the future. I can only do this now. The present moment is a realization where it's the only time you can actually interact with your life. The narrative, the stories and the fantasies can distract you from the only thing that's real, right? But the human condition has found so many different uses for story making and fantasizing and basically mental time travel. It is a tool that has sort of overcome the mind, where we're always thinking in past and future, and so little of the time are we actually right here, right now. So stillness, that state of awareness, right? When speaking with people, there's a couple of pain points that often come up. I'm bad at meditating. So the bad at meditating piece is somebody shuts their eyes and looks inwards and hopes to get instantaneous clarity and calm right away. And then the stories and the narratives come up. And for example, if you sit down and you can speak to expert meditators who've been doing this for decades and say, count to 30 without any thoughts coming in, it's extremely difficult, just to count to 30 without any type of thought coming in, right? Because the mind is so incessant when we're awake. Now, with the I'm bad at meditating, you become aware of how often your mind gets pulled into the past and future, that because you're aware of it and you're starting to take tab of it, you think, oh my God, I must be bad at this. When really, that awareness in the first place is such huge progress, such huge progress. Now, if you map that onto, if I go to the gym and I'm working out and say I'm doing bicep curls, the reps that count are the ones that are close to failure. That's when you're breaking down muscle and rebuilding it, and you're getting stronger and you'll get results. Exactly. So if you think about meditation in that sense, where it's actually when I catch myself thinking, the repetition is coming back to the silence, because then you get better at coming back all of the time. Then you train the skill of being able to do that throughout your day. And that is those two little nuances where firstly, it's like, okay, if I'm thinking a lot, that's not a bad thing. And secondly, the thing that I celebrate is coming back to the piece. Then it's like, okay, cool. Now we have a couple of concepts, which mean I don't beat myself up when I try and do this. And it again leads to persistence. I can continue to persist with this practice for a little bit longer, right? Then it gets into really, really fun territory. Because if we define stillness as a state of awareness, you can be still, and a lot of people will have experiences with the similar states of awareness when they get into something like flow. If you're chopping vegetables and you're a chef and all of a sudden you're just there with the carrots and you're slicing it thinner and thinner and thinner and thinner, and you get into that state and you throw it together and all of that, you're in a sort of state of stillness because your mind isn't in the mental time trap, right? Similarly, if you watch your child walking for the first time, you're not thinking about the burrito you're going to have for breakfast tomorrow. You're just observing the present. Your mind is really quiet. Now, those two things sort of happen, they sort of happen to you. You know, it's more passive. We're constantly looking around, waiting for these moments that feel so good, that feels so peaceful and so fulfilling. Whereas an introspective practice is the other way around. You're basically training your mind to extend those moments, right? If you're training your mind to come back to the piece, to let go of the narrative, then when your child's walking and a thought comes in, it's like, no. And you extend it and you elongate it. And then when you start having that type of relationship with your life and really opening up to presence throughout all of your day, you realize that this isn't necessarily for people sat on the side of the Himalayas in the lotus position. It's like, oh my God, I can apply this to anything. Even if you're a salesperson and you're trying to book more sales, it's like if you're trying to sell somebody something, and instead of thinking about all of the next thoughts or your playbook or anything like that, you just quiet everything down and you observe and you look, you get so much more information coming in, and then you can actually give real feedback. You can actually go, oh, okay, yeah, here, this actually could be this, etc., etc. And so you can apply it to anything that you gauge as performing well. I use the sales example because in a lot of careers, salesmanship is one that is really, really outcomes oriented, right?
Yes.
You don't hit your numbers, you're getting the cut. And so that's something that is very performance driven. I need to perform. And so where stillness comes into actual performance is you can apply this state of awareness to absolutely anything that you're doing and make it better because you are more vivid, you are more alive, you are attending to whatever it is more fully. And at that point, of course, you're going to perform better. And another example, if you have the ability to let go of the narrative, it's really helpful. Say you're an athlete and say you're surfing, right? And there's a perfect wave that's coming. If you jump on your board and you're thinking to yourself, oh, I better not screw this up. That narrative's going to get in the way and you're not going to be there, right? But if you, again, have this ability to let go of that, be in your body and say, okay, yeah, this is the work that I've done on the meditation cushion this morning, where it's like, there goes the narrative, back to this, back to right here. Then comes the wave and you jump up and you're right there. Holy shit, your performance goes through the roof. Mm-hmm. So hopefully that in a succinct enough way sort of answers the questions.
It's training. So it's like cross training. So anyway, someone was about to go on a stage on the David Letterman show, and he was at the back and he was nervous. And John Travolta apparently said to him, he put his hand on his chest, goes, "You've done all the work. Like, everything's been done." And he was like, yeah, I've done all the work. Like, if I go up there and I'm just here and not worrying about all the stories and things in total like trust, it all just comes. And so by practicing stillness, coming back to stillness, and then also practicing when you're cooking or having a conversation with someone, just to be doing that is strengthening the muscle. It's training the muscle. So then when you are in the heated moment of in a sales meeting or wherever it is, you've been there before multiple times. You've done the work. And so it's familiar. And so it's so much more easy for you to access that. And when you are, and as you know, So the biggest barriers to performance and being happy are being stuck too much in the past and the future. If you're able to, right? That's where the fucking misery comes. If you're able just to be here, this is when you enter another level. And so that's just a really, really, I remember hearing also Jim talk about it on Thursday. We had the session. There's this also a false idea. Some people get that now they're suddenly to be this like, monk in the Himalayas. And that actually isn't the ideal, because you need to practice strength and muscle and then get back into the arena of living, right?
Yes.
It's not about becoming this guy who's detached, a woman who's detached from the world. It's like, no, practice and then throw yourself in the thick of it, right?
And that's where the hardest practice is done. It's really easy to still your mind on a Vipassana retreat, right? Try being still at Thanksgiving dinner. That's where the work is.
Yes.
Like, that's where it's really difficult. Try holding that, because there's so much that's going to want to pull you in different directions. It's really easy to be still when you're watching the sunrise and the sunset. And that's why, practicing is so important, because then you can prepare yourself for the hardest moments. Then you can really get more aware of your emotional setting when that gets caught off. And then the best piece about stillness is if you truly still your mind and you have no perception of past or future, all negative emotions fall apart.
It's almost impossible.
How can you be anxious without a perception of the future? How can you be angry without a perception of the past?
Yep.
The narratives are what's enforcing that. If you stop the internal noise and you interrupt it, then you can just feel the emotion for itself. It's like, this is what anger feels like. And if it's not constantly getting fueled, it just kind of dissipates, right? And then that's where the work gets really exciting, because you start doing this more and more. And if you go in with this curiosity mindset, you go in being like, I just want to explore. What is this sort of amorphous energy cloud behind my eyes that is my mood? And how can I sort of change it volitionally? And somebody cuts you off in traffic and you're like, look at this narrative. Look at it flying. Look at it flying. Oh yeah. And it's addictive. It feels good. You're going wild. And you're like, wow, look at this thing. Then you stop the narrative and you just feel what it's like to have a minor discretion, a social discretion having done to you in the car. And then you're like, that's really funny. And it just falls apart. And so exactly to what Jim was saying, that the real work is done in the real world. You don't have to fly to Bali to find fulfillment. You just sort of change your environment, and then it makes it even more difficult to find it when you come back. Yep. It's like, no, you can do this right here. It's actually far more rewarding and way more sustainable. This is a long-term relationship that you're establishing with one that is, it's more generalist. You can do it in a variety of settings, and one that is really more potent because it's closer to you and your current identity. So if you can really sort of exercise that practice in this arena, especially again, as we go to a society that is capitalist and consumerist and always trying to divert your attention away from right here, right now. If you can do it here, if you can do it in the place where the reps are the hardest, you will create the most resilience within yourself.
I love it. And so there's also what I love about Still, and sort of we'll tie it off here, is you've got the modalities surrounded by Still, but you've also got other things that you use. So like I've come to sessions where we've got ice baths, breath work and sound healings, and it's actually a really amazing community. And there's also a certain, I'll use the word caliber of people that are coming to what you've created, which shows that this persistence over time. There's a message going out that's calling in a certain style of people, which is every time I come to these events, I've met really amazing people, which is cool. So anyone who's floating around Abbot Kinney in Venice, there's an in-person venue here that have amazing events. And also you've got your the app. Anything else that we need to know about Still Life before I let you go? What's coming up? I think there's isn't there a big masterclass program coming up soon?
Yes. So we've got a 6-month program with Jim, who's our chief facilitator. And this man has spent decades in a state of stillness, so much so that his personal story is he chooses not to identify with it. Because if you spend so much time right here, right now, that narrative that is constantly changing all of the time, is you see it for it being what it really is. It's a story. It's a piece of fiction. This guy has spent decades that as a coach, a mentor, whatever you want to call it, but really just in a state of stillness, perceiving the present and using these gifts that he's been given to truly help people and build frameworks around it. So we have a 6-month program that we're launching in March, which basically explores many different tools and techniques to get still for any occasion, and then how to apply this to things like your values, right? We were talking about this earlier. If I have an ability to still my mind, I have an ability to clearly and accurately evaluate my values, right? Then to how to apply that to relationships. That's the third workshop, where it's like, okay, I now understand Janoah's values and my own values. How closely do I want to have Janoah to me, knowing what those values really are? Because a lot of the time what happens is that I get a really abbreviated and very coarse, broad brush stroke about who you are and make a ton of assumptions and then bring you to a place within me that's too close and then collide with reality and say, well, you know what, Janoah, I fell in love with this fantasy that I had of you and all of a sudden you're just being you and it's making me suffer. So, I don't like that. But yeah, using stillness with appropriating relationships. That's the third workshop. The fourth is in communication. The fifth is in just breath, going into breath work. And then the sixth is some real advanced stillness techniques. So that's a workshop a month in a cohort of 20 people. And that's sort of like our membership model.
Yep.
If you sign up for the program, you have open access to all of our events. So that's a couple of yoga classes a week, cold plunger 2 a week. Then there's sound baths, all of these things, breath work on top of that. Because what we've really tried to do with Still Life is create a lifestyle, create an ability where you can come and you can access stillness in a variety of modalities with all of these, with this. And again, we're coming back to not being very specific as a business, but with all of these ways to find stillness and then apply it. And with the program, we just sort of say 6 months, life-changing transformation. If you don't agree with us by month 3, all of your money back. We have not done our jobs. We apologize. And so that's really what we've got launching in March. But until then, you can find events on our website. Follow us on Instagram. We tend to post a lot on Instagram and have a lot of upcoming events through there too. So that's at still.life. And then our website is www.still.life. And other than that, I think that's all encompassing. Thank you so much for having me today. I really appreciate the conversation and just your company in general.
Mate, it's a great chat. And I can vouch for Still.
Love it.
Keep coming back.
Love it. Love it.
All right, Henry. Chat to you soon, mate.
All right. Chat to you soon.
See ya.